Welcome to Locked On NBA Game Night for Tuesday night, October 29th. I'm Wes Goldberg here with Tony East. Coming up, the Nuggets are asking Nikola Jokic to do more than ever. Anthony Edwards and Kyrie Irving duel it out in Minnesota, and the Warriors adjust to life without Steph Curry.
When that final buzzer rings, you know it's time for Locked On NBA Game Night. All the post-game reactions to every game across the league, every single night, with insights only the hosts at Locked On can provide. Prepare to experience game day reactions like never before, only on Locked On NBA Game Night. Your team every day.
Welcome to Locked On NBA Game Night, every game, every night. Wes Goldberg here with Tony East. However, you might be tuning in on YouTube, Odyssey, or your favorite podcast app. Thanks so much for making Locked On NBA your first listen every day. Today's episode is brought to you by Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, use the code LOCKEDONNBA for $20 off your first purchase. A fun Tuesday night of hoops. The Nuggets won their second overtime game in 2 nights. The Kings dominated the Jazz, and the Warriors adjusted to life without Steph Curry. But let's start with our game of the night. The Dallas Mavericks went into Minnesota and beat the Timberwolves 120-114 thanks to 35 points from Kyrie Irving, but not before Luka Doncic appeared to have injured himself in the game. Here's Nick Angstadt from Locked On Mavs with more.
A win in Minnesota, second night of a back-to-back for the Mavericks. They come in, and Luka Doncic gives the Mavs an injury scare in this game. At the end of the first half, he starts holding his knee after he threw up a shot, and Jaden McDaniels ran into the back of him. He was holding his right knee, he was holding his leg, and he limped right into the locker room with 1:30 left in that half. He ends up coming back, warms up, and just plays the beginning of the second half. An absolute total Luka boo-boo moment where he just has an injury. We all freak out, and then he's fine. The story in this one, Kyrie Irving, 35 points, an absolute heater from him. When Anthony Edwards started this game, he had 24 in the first quarter, but Kyrie Irving responded and finished with 35 of his own, 6 of 8 from 3 in this one for Kyrie Irving. Just led this team, scored when they needed to, hit tough buckets, clutch buckets, one-on-one, switches, whatever was thrown at Kyrie Irving, he was able to take them, and it was great to see Kyrie Irving really get his offense going because we haven't seen that yet this season. The Mavs really coming along.
So, Tony, this one looked like it was headed towards instant classic territory before Luka and Anthony Edwards got shook up in this one. But what was the difference for the Mavericks in this game?
Turnovers in their favor in this case. Only 9 for Dallas. Credit to the Mavs, even though they have a team dominated by ball handlers who can throw very fancy, insane passes. They do not turn it over very much as a team in this game. Only 9, 20 for the Minnesota Timberwolves. That, some rebounding differences led to 16 more shot attempts for Dallas in this game. Even when you aren't playing at your absolute best, even following up one of Luka's worst games in a long time, and a game he gets hurt, you can win when you get that many more chances. And when Kyrie Irving reminds us that he's still really freaking good, man.
That's really it, right? I mean, Anthony Edwards had this great game. Luka Doncic played really well, mostly in the first half before he got shook up with that injury. But the difference was Dallas just had another dude. Dallas had Kyrie Irving, where you look at what Minnesota was dealing with. Yeah, you got 20 points on 13 shots from Julius Randle. That was okay, but it wasn't anything like what Kyrie was giving you with those 35 points. And then you look up and down the roster for the Mavericks, and it just felt like they were getting contributions all over the place. Like Daniel Gafford had a heck of a first quarter. He goes 6 of 6 overall for 14 points. PJ Washington scores 17 points. He had a couple of steal and scores, running the break and scoring in the full court there. And, Najee Marshall came up big with a steal at the end. And so they just got the contributions that they needed from up and down the roster, whereas Minnesota, they still just sort of feel like they're figuring things out a little bit here. Like, it wasn't the best Dante DiVincenzo game. 1 for 6 from him. Naz Reid had his moments. Nickeil Alexander-Walker went, I think it was in the third quarter, made like 3 3-pointers in 6 minutes or something. It was crazy. He just started going off all of a sudden. But outside of those things, it wasn't a whole lot going on for the Timberwolves. With the Mavericks, I don't know. Maybe it's too simple to just say they had the best player in the game, but they had the best player in the game.
You're not going to win much when your primary ball handlers shoot a combined 3 for 12. Need a little more from DiVincenzo or Conley. Conley, we talked about this opening night, Wes. They're going to need him to be better than he's been. He was okay in this game, but you're going to need him to be better going forward, and because that's such a big thing, having threatening ball handlers. Conley was awesome last year. Ant can obviously handle it all the time, but we've seen it this year. Ant's playmaking not up to the highest levels on this team. They have to play through other guys at times. Randall did have 7 assists, for example, but your guards have to step up if you're Minnesota and really shoot it, given that the rest of the team doesn't provide enough spacing. They didn't get any of that in this game, and that, where the Mavs were pretty solid across the board. I mean, did anyone who played for them have a bad game in any way, right? And this lively Gafford 1-2 punch is just so remarkable that they're so consistent this year, even when Luka's having off nights or gets hurt mid-game. So you can't afford those kind of stinkers as guards against Dallas, but Wolves got them from 2 guys.
Yeah, you could argue both of their centers outplayed Rudy Gobert. Just 7 points, 8 rebounds for that guy. Anthony Edwards has been taking a lot of three-pointers, mostly taking three-pointers to start the season. He started getting into the paint more in this game, especially early. It was a monster first quarter for Ant, but he just couldn't keep it going for the rest of the game. But let's turn our sights to Brooklyn, where the Nuggets beat the Nets in overtime, 144-139. It's Denver's second overtime win in as many nights after they beat the Raptors on Monday night. Nikola Jokic played more than 40 minutes in each one of those games. Here's Ryan Blackburn from Locked On Nuggets with more.
It's winning 144-139 in overtime. I mean, you get it done any way that you can, right? This was one of those games against the Brooklyn Nets that the Nuggets had to have. Second night of a back-to-back, you go all out for that one. Nikola Jokic playing the way that he's playing. You got to get it done. Denver doesn't look that great right now, but they still find a way to get it done. Important win for the Nuggets early, 2-2 so far on the season. See what happens.
So, Tony, I was listening to Locked On Nuggets after they beat Toronto in overtime, and it felt like the theme of that episode was, well, a win's a win. They were 0-2 going into that game. I know it was the Raptors. They're not a very good opponent. The Nuggets are supposed to be this championship contender, but hey, they got a W on the board. I could see that point coming off that Toronto game, and, look, you can kind of just close your eyes and say, yeah, you know what? It's the second night of a back-to-back on the road. These games are always tough. But the Brooklyn Nets stink, man. And I know like they beat the Bucks the other night, but it shouldn't take 40-plus minutes, 2 overtime games to beat the Raptors and the Nets. I don't know how good you could feel about this one if you're a Nuggets fan.
Yeah, and I mean, they needed a miracle to beat Toronto, right? Like that game, they were down 10 or 12 with a couple minutes to go. Like that was very dicey. And this game, they're Dorian Finney-Smith wide open corner 3 at the end of regulation away from losing to the Nets, right? The margin's very thin for them in this game. The difference, first of all, by the way, when you lead into games, you have to talk about the stars. This was a Billy Kennedy game. He is the star of every game that he is a part of. And there were lots of reviews and challenges, so I had a very good time watching Nets Nuggets. If you know, you know. At the same time, I mean, Jokic was everything, right? Like he wasn't playing bad or anything, but you didn't feel him as much in the first 2.5 quarters, and then down the stretch, he was just unstoppable. Like they would just go to him in the post, and he'd say, "Oh, Nick Claxton, Noah Clowney, whoever tiny guy you have on me who's thin, yeah, I'm just gonna put him under the basket and score." And he had 29, 18, and 16. Insane stat line, and it still took them overtime to beat the Brooklyn Nets. And the Nets had some pretty great performances from players you don't expect it from. Zaire Williams looked sensational. Jalen Wilson looked really good. Schroeder has been balling all year and had a bunch of assists, lobbing right over the Nuggets' heads to whoever. But the Nuggets are not playing well. They are 2-2, and they are not playing well. They are very lucky to have the record they have.
So Nikola Jokic, these last couple of games here against Toronto, 44 minutes, 40 points, 10 rebounds, 4 assists. Against Brooklyn in this one, 41 minutes, 29 points, 18 rebounds, 16 assists. I mean, the guy's playing MVP caliber games. And these are classic Jokic games. These aren't even your run-of-the-mill, like, oh, another triple-double for Jokic. Like, this is classic stuff, and yet they're going to overtime against objectively bad teams. And there's a lot that goes into that. You mentioned Jokic at the end of these games. Like, had to go into takeover mode. You can almost see the switch flip in his head where he's like, all right, enough of all this BS. I'm just going to go ahead and win the game. And he's still the best player on the planet and still very much obviously capable of doing it. But to have to do this just to get a couple of your first W's of the entire season, has to be troubling. The Nuggets have won back-to-back games. I don't know that they've done anything to silence the concerns about their team. And mostly the biggest concern feels like it's only getting worse. And it's looming, and it feels like something needs to change. We're going to talk about that next year as we continue Locked On NBA Game Night. Today's episode of Locked On NBA is brought to you by Game Time. Game Time is a new feature called Game Time Picks that makes getting tickets to see your favorite teams play live even easier. Game Time Picks filters out all the fluff to show you only incredible deals on great seats so you don't have to waste time searching through thousands of tickets. With Game Time Picks, curation makes it easier to save more on sports, concerts, comedy, theater, and any event that you want to attend. Game Time is the place to get tickets for the events that you want to see. By using the all-in pricing feature, you see the total upfront with no surprise fees at checkout. With Seat Views, you get a panoramic view from your seat in the app before you buy. With their lowest price guarantee, if you find a cheaper ticket, Game Time will credit you 110% of the difference. And with Game Time ticket coverage, your purchase is covered with the most flexible customer service policy in the ticketing industry. So take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Game Time Picks. Download the Game Time app, create an account, use the code Locked On for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account, redeem the code Locked On, LOCKEDON, for $20 off. Download Game Time today. What time is it? It's game time. Thanks again for making Locked On NBA Game Night your first listen every game, every night. The best way to support the show is to subscribe on YouTube and on your favorite podcast app. Sticking with the Nuggets here before we move on to the Steph Curry-less Warriors, Tony. This is the worst bench in the NBA. Going into tonight, it was only to be outdone by the Utah Jazz's bench. Another one of those teams kind of actively trying to lose games here, at least in terms of how they've constructed the roster. The Nuggets are not trying to lose games. The Nuggets are actually trying to sell you at that, hey, you know what? The bench is pretty good. Look, we just added Russell Westbrook. We added Dario Saric. We think we're going to get more out of Peyton Watson and Julian Strawther and all these guys. And their bench stinks. And it just keeps getting worse. And there is no amount of shoe polish that you could put on the Russell Westbrook experience for me to believe that it is any good. Here's Russell Westbrook in this game. 22 points on 5 of 12 shooting and 5 assists with 1 turnover off the bench. That feels like it should be awesome. Made both of his three-pointers. That is trash talking up and down the court the entire second half. That feels like it should be good. He scored 22 points in 20 minutes. How was he a 0 plus minus? That's the part that's so striking with Russell Westbrook. It's like the points and all the production is one thing, but it's all empty calories with this guy. And he basically gives back every shot, every point that he makes on defense. He's been atrocious defensively all season long. This was his most productive scoring night by a wide margin because mostly he hasn't been much of a factor on the offensive end either. I think the Nuggets have a huge problem with this bench, and I don't see a way for them to fix it.
I really thought Westbrook changed the game energy-wise early in the fourth quarter, but that bench group defensively was terrible in this game. I mean, part of the Nets being so hot from the field the whole time, I make sure I had the right Cam. Cam Johnson, I think, made his first 5 or 6 threes in this game. He was on fire among many Nets shooters who were just like ridiculously scorching in this game. Schroeder couldn't miss. Zaire Williams couldn't miss. I already ran through some of these guys. So, Westbrook's energy was huge. He was making shots, getting to the rim, drawing a bunch of fouls. They really needed that because they needed some break up the rhythm of the Nets in some way because they weren't stopping them at all. And Strawther was good and the preseason hasn't given them enough. And Peyton Watson hit a huge 3 in this game from a momentum perspective, but there's just no spacing on this team at all. And it's especially the case when the bench is out there. But you go 5 minutes, you're like, oh yeah, Dario Saric is out there. I didn't even realize it. It's really rough. And their spacing really bleeds into their starters too. Aaron Gordon hit a huge 3 where they just completely abandoned him to put 4 guys on Jokic and 1 on the ball late in this game. But they have no spacing at all. And so when Jokic is out or when the bench group's in without at least Michael Porter Jr. or at least the handling of Murray or whatever, when they lose any of that, they look really, really rough. And Murray started slow in this game and got going later. But it's been tough sledding for the Nuggets. They definitely need at least one more something who can either shoot or dribble or something.
Yeah, Jamal Murray took 7 3-point attempts in this one. Michael Porter Jr. took 7 3-point attempts in this one.
They're trying.
Opponents are leaving Christian Brown just open. This is
they're leaving everybody
they're leaving everybody open. But this was part of the sales pitch, right? From the Nuggets front office was, hey, Christian Brown's going to walk in. He's going to replace Kentavious Caldwell-Pope. We think he's going to up his volume from 3-point range, and teams are just leaving him open. And look, he went 2 for 3 from tonight, so he made him pay. Good for him, but. He's a good cutter. He does all these other things that you like, but you're absolutely right. There's zero space among the starting group. That starting group basically has to play together because it's their only way to create a huge advantage in any of these games. But every time they leave, it's sort of the bench group plus Michael Porter Jr. in some of these weird lineups with Russell Westbrook and Dario Saric. And because I was so mean to Russell Westbrook, I feel like I have to be equally mean to Dario Saric. That guy is toast. Like he does not look good. His age is starting to show in a real way. He's missing bunnies pretty much every single night now for Denver. And so I just don't think they have the personnel off the bench, and the starting lineup it feels like the math problem that hurt them last year with not enough 3-point attempts and too many mid-range attempts has not gone away. And if anything, it's probably even a little bit worse now. And that's why you just keep going back to Jokic, because he's huge and he's skilled and he's amazing. And it's just like, hey, this guy just can bail us out of everything, but you're asking him to do a lot within the first couple of weeks of the season. And it's fair to wonder if they can keep doing it.
A take. They should start Strother in Christian Brown's spot. I don't know how much that would help the starters, but I think Brown can dribble a little, and he's super juiced up. You can still play him a lot with the starters as the sixth man. I think that would add balance to their rotation in a way that they really need.
They might have to try anything at this point. So let's go to Golden State, where the Warriors, without Steph Curry, Andrew Wiggins, or DeAnthony Melton, beat the Pelicans 124-106, dominating the game after the first quarter, thanks to 21 made three-pointers. This is their first game without Steph, who injured his ankle on Sunday. The Warriors went to a new starting lineup and benched one of their most important players. Here's Charlie Walter from Locked On Warriors with more.
So the big storyline of the game was Steph Curry not playing for Golden State, nor was Andrew Wiggins, and nor was DeAnthony Melton. So they're missing three starters. But the good thing about the Golden State Warriors, they have tons of depth. Unfortunately, that depth did not showcase itself early on. A brutal first quarter for Golden State. 14 points on 5 of 22 from the floor, 2 of 12 on their three-pointers. They were down by as much as 20. Then they started testing that depth. A player that had only seen garbage time, even called a human victory cigar. Lindy Waters, how about him? He scores 21 points in the game off the bench for Golden State. Then Buddy Hield, who had 3 points, and you thought Lindy Waters was replacing Hield in this game. Hield gets his opportunity when Waters gets a little tired, and Hield pours in 25 points in the second half. 9 of 18 shooting, once again, hit 7 threes. It's a weekly occurrence. Buddy Hield hitting 7 threes. And the Warriors, who were down 20 points in the first quarter, wind up winning by 18, 124-106. They win it by 18 points and improved to 3-1 on the season. Brandon Bajemski chipped in 19 points, 17 for Jonathan Kuminga, and 14 for Moses Moody. The Golden State Warriors hit 21 threes in the game. I'm Charlie Walter with Locked On Warriors. Be sure to catch the post-game show. It's on YouTube right now.
So he mentioned the first quarter numbers there from 3-point range. The Warriors between the second and fourth quarter went 19 of 34 from 3-point range. Wow. That's 58%. And that's with Steph Curry watching from the bench. It was a crazy shooting performance. And it's the entire reason. We can parse all these other things. I do want to get to the Jonathan Kuminga thing here in a second. But yeah, when you're shooting like that, you're going to blow the doors off a Pelicans team that didn't shoot poorly, but only got up 22 3-point attempts. And that's the math problem right there, Tony.
The Warriors outscored the Pelicans by over a point a minute for 3 quarters of the game. This game was so strange because their first quarter sucked, and then they just destroyed them all night the rest of the way. It was so impressive. And their depth has been not a problem, but just Quinn is like this, what are they going to do about it? How's it going to, who cares? You can just play all of them whenever you want. And when someone's good, you just play them. And that's how you get Lindy Waters being awesome. And that's how you get Buddy Hield being awesome. Although Reggie Miller took all the credit for that during the game. But those two were sensational. And all they needed was, just regular old solid play from the rest of their team. And they got it. I mean, Kuminga actually played, I thought, pretty solid off the bench, but Hield and Waters changed the game in the second half. And nobody could miss from deep on that team.
Yeah, you look at the box score, and it's just weird, the minute allotment, right? You have starters playing 17 minutes each. You've got Gary Payton II, who I thought gave them really good minutes in the second quarter. He played 8 minutes total in this game. You've got Lindy Waters, who I don't know how many people have even heard of this guy, right? He played for Oklahoma City in the past. obviously is part of, he was sort of the victory cigar for the Warriors, like Charlie was alluding to. He plays 30 minutes in this game. Like, this is what Steve Kerr's sort of nightly assignment is okay, I'm going to play. He's consistently playing like 12 guys in these first quarters before you even get to that second quarter. And his job is just sort of to figure out in a snap, like, okay, who are the guys that I'm going to ride tonight? Like, which guys are clicking, which guys are feeling it, who's got the hot hand. And that's a tough thing for Steve Kerr to figure out. But hey, like, no Steph, no Wiggins, no Melton. It kind of made it a little bit easier for him in a weird way in this game to sort of ride those guys and figure out which guys were playing well. So a number of contributions. Moses Moody hitting a crazy three-pointer in the fourth quarter. That kind of served as a dagger or something close to it. But he healed, going 7-11 from three-point range overall. Lindy Waters, we already mentioned, 21 points for him off the bench. But the big story, or maybe not the big story, I guess if the A story was this is what the Warriors did without Steph Curry, the B story is they changed the starting lineup because they had to. We'll talk about that and what it means for Jonathan Kuminga going forward next here on Locked On NBA. Thanks again for making Locked On NBA Game Night your first listen every day, every game, every night here on Locked On NBA Game Night. Before we get to our final game from the night, finishing up on the Warriors game here. So with no Steph Curry, we knew that they were probably going to have to switch up their starting lineup, the Warriors were. So before Steph got hurt, it was Steph, Wiggins, Kuminga, Draymond Green, Trace Jackson Davis. And it was a bet on, hey, look, Steph is just this is the greatest shooter of all time. Just having him on the court might be enough spacing for us, right? And we're just going to lean in on size and defense everywhere else on the court, at least in that starting lineup, and then we'll figure out the rest of the bench going forward. But when Steph got hurt, it kind of threw everything up in the air, and Steve Kerr clearly decided, okay, I can't play Trace Jackson Davis, Draymond Green, and Jonathan Kuminga if Steph's not out there. There's just not going to be enough spacing. So he benches Kuminga, starts Moses Moody and Brandon Podziemski, also because no Andrew Wiggins, no D'Anthony Melton in this one. So he goes with Pods and Moody as his floor spacing guys, along with Buddy Hield, starts him too. And then Draymond and Trace Jackson Davis basically as the only two starters who are not floor spacers. And yeah, I mean, it didn't exactly work to start the game. It was a little clunky, mostly because there's not really a true point guard in that lineup, maybe outside of Draymond, depending on what you want to consider him. But Jonathan Kuminga comes off the bench, 28 minutes, 17 points, gets to the line, has some big moments, a big block and a score in this game, has 3 or 2 steals in this game as well. I thought he gave him really good minutes off the bench, but it'll be interesting, Tony, to see what happens with this starting lineup when you start to get some of these guys back. And Steph Curry, it sounds like he's probably going to be reevaluated at the end of this week.
Especially interesting because different lineup to start the second half. Buddy Hield, see ya. It's Lindy Waters time. And then Buddy Hield was like, just kidding. I'm the greatest player on the team. But yeah, I mean, that was very revealing too, that it didn't work to start the game. It's interesting that Wiggins was out too and Melton, because you could tell they just tried like, okay, let's just do as much shooting as we can with Pods here. And then they went away from it after it didn't work to start the game. But that whole group was pretty good in the second half. And, you know, it's the other thing that Kerr's going to have to deal with is every time he's tried to push a different button to try to figure out who should play and who hasn't, he's been playing 12 guys so much, whoever he puts in there does pretty well, right? In some kind of convoluted way, or it's going to be a, you know, they always say a good problem to have. Well, a good problem to have is still a problem. They'll have to figure that out eventually, but their depth keeps finding ways, even with this funky lineup not working and then working in the second half after Hield gets benched. It was strange. Kerr's pushing right buttons so far, but I think they've got to, if they're going to start Pods, he can shoot well enough that they just need one of Hield and Moody with whoever they go with Wiggins. I think they should probably keep Kuminga at the second unit because this spacing did work. Like they looked like they had a lot of room to operate all night.
Yeah, and Draymond basically is the point guard in that starting lineup. Had 7 assists to 0 turnovers in this game, so it was a great game for him, and he's used to playing that position anyway, or at least running that offense in that way. So, yeah, I think it works. I don't have a problem with it. Kuminga, just keep being productive. You love the way that he came out. He wasn't in a bad mood because he wasn't starting anymore. He wants to start. Obviously, there's the whole thing about the contract looming, but I think everybody understands that this is a short-term thing.
Agreed.
Our final game, the Kings went into Utah, blew out the Jazz, 113-96. They led by as many as 27 points in this one. Here's Matt George with Locked On Kings with more on how everything went down.
Now, that right there is how good teams handle their business against lesser competition. For the second night in a row, the Sacramento Kings wall-to-wall domination over teams that they should be better than in the Western Conference. And even though they're now just 2-2 to start the season, one thing that's been consistent through all 4 games, that's DeMar DeRozan. 4 games for Sacramento, 4 games with 20 or more points. There have only been 2 names in the history of the Kings to do that. You may have heard of these guys. Chris Webber and Oscar Robinson. I don't know why people expected any different from DeMar DeRozan. Just because he's 35 years old doesn't mean anything's going to change. He's been averaging over 20 points a game for 11 straight seasons. So why in the world would that stop now that he's in Sacramento? I'm glad that the age number is as irrelevant as the people who thought DeMar was simply going to be worse because he's putting on a Kings jersey. All of those takes are irrelevant too. Kings back to 500, 2-2 on the season, and a lot of games still for them to get on this 4-game road trip. And those 2 losses to start the season actually might end up being a blessing in disguise for this Kings team, because it seems like they've discovered the key to unlocking the best version of themselves. I'll talk about that more on tonight's Locked On Kings podcast.
Yes.
Well done, Matt. The world's biggest DeMar DeRozan fan. Wow, good for him.
I gotta work on my post game analysis. That was as good as it gets. Although I will disagree. Look, before you get going, Matt, you're my man. I gotta disagree with wire to wire dominance. It was a 4-point game with 2 minutes to go in the first half.
It certainly helps that Markkanen went down at halftime.
Yeah,
and it helps when you're playing. If the formula here for the Kings is just play Portland and Utah every game, then they'll be just fine.
They did look really good opponent regardless tonight. They looked really good.
They did. Let's finish up with some power rankings.
Go power rankings. Go power rankings.
Tonight, in order of importance, big dealness. That's what we're going to do here. And the 4th most important win of our 4 wins belongs to our Sacramento Kings. I'm not buying it. I know they look good. I'm a fan of the Sacramento Kings. I love De'Aaron Fox, Domantas Sabonis, DeMar DeRozan, Mike Brown, the whole thing. It's all great. It's all great. But they've yet to beat a good team. They've beaten up on the bad teams. I already knew this about Sacramento. And so I knew they were good enough to beat the bad teams. And my biggest question with the Kings is, are they good enough to beat the good teams in the Western Conference? And I still don't have the answer to that question so far this season. So I don't really care about this win that much for the Sacramento Kings.
I love when Sabonis dominates like that and is such a tone setter. It's so fun to watch the Kings when that happens. And I like Matt George was a DeMar DeRozan to the Kings truther. So watching all 3 of Fox, Sabonis, and DeRozan do really well in the same game made me go, oh, that could be important for a turning point. The Jazz without Markkanen are also really bad, and their guards were terrible. So I do agree with your result, even though I thought the Kings deserve more credit than a 15-point win over the Jazz.
I want to love DeMar DeRozan, Sabonis, and Fox, and I still like them. I kind of was always higher than them on that free agent move than a lot of people, because everybody, and I get it, they claim, the fit is a little weird, the spacing's tough, like there's only one basketball, like all these like really valid arguments, and yet I just kept going back to DeMar DeRozan's nice, and I think he's just like a little change of pace for that Sacramento Kings team, and I like that they're just doubling down on offense, understanding that they probably have a pretty inherent ceiling defensively as long as you're built around Fox and Sabonis to begin with. Yeah. But hey, there it is. I need more from the Kings to figure out how good they actually are. Number 3 best win of the night belongs to our Denver Nuggets. Again, you can look at it 2 ways. Cool, second night on the road, back-to-back, went to overtime, still got the win. That's a big deal. Nikola Jokic looks like an MVP candidate again. But at the same time, you needed overtime to beat Toronto and then Brooklyn, and that's not great. So we still have our concerns about the Nuggets. We already discussed
I would have debated this, except the Kings played a bad team that played bad, and the Nuggets played a bad team that played good. So congrats to Denver. You get to be 3rd.
Great analysis. I've got the Dallas Mavericks number 2 here. And I don't know how I feel about that, but that was a really good win against the Minnesota Timberwolves. We led the show with it for a reason. You know what? When you could beat the Timberwolves, when you could beat Anthony Edwards, when you could beat the team that you had to beat in the Western Conference Finals last year, this very well could be another playoff series here, and both teams looked a lot different coming off the Western Conference Finals last year. Obviously, you have Klay Thompson now in Dallas. You got all the changes that Minnesota made. So for the Mavericks to get a little bit of a proof of concept here and win this game, I think was huge.
I think so too. Road win also very impressive against a team like that, although they did it in the postseason last year. Shout out to the Warriors for actually taking care of business at home, which apparently was the hardest thing in the NBA tonight. They're both impressive wins for different reasons, I think. But I can get on board with either order. I think I'd put the Mavs number one personally because of how good Minnesota could be this year, especially with that Ant versus corner and Luka getting hurt. But they are both pretty good wins for both teams.
The reason I have the Warriors number one here is because they were without their best players, and they got a really important win against New Orleans here, and they're about to play New Orleans again Wednesday night on the second night of a back-to-back, this little home-and-home thing. If you could get another win against the Pelicans again, you've got Houston after that, and then Washington after that, before a November 6th game on ESPN against the Boston Celtics. There's a chance for you to be 6-1 by the time you get into that Celtics game. That would be really big for this Warriors team that looked really good in the preseason and was fortunate, I think. Or not fortunate, that's not fair, but did get the win tonight and needs to get another win against New Orleans, because then after that, it's a couple of easier type of opponents there. That'll do it for us tonight. Locked On NBA game night, every game, every night. Make sure you're subscribed on YouTube, Odyssey, and wherever you get your podcasts.